and say welcome everybody again. So in a moment I'll hand over to Jayne Woodley, who's going to give you an update on the Resilience Fund and the work the Foundation have been doing over the last week or so. After that, we will be handing over to Graham Ingram from Oxford University, who is a specialist in online security, and is, I think, probably going to tell us why Zoom isn't the best option, but unfortunately it's the one we're using for a host of user-friendly reasons, but will give us advice on how to make yourselves as secure as possible now that we are all working online so much more. And then after Graham, we will have Rupert da Silva from Oxfordshire All In, who I'm sure many of you will know, who's going to tell us a little story about Oxfordshire All In and how they came to be and what they're doing. So I will hand over now, before I hand over to Jayne, just to say there should be time for questions and answers. If you want to raise questions or have comments as we're going through, please do make them in the chat box, and we will try and respond them as we go through the meeting. And if we have time for question and answer at the end, you can remotely raise your hand or just start speaking if it's very quiet. And I will now hand over to Jayne, who is preparing her slides, and mute myself. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Adrian, and hello to everyone. As we say, I think everyone's slightly getting used to this technology now. So, and as Adrian said, this is the 4th of our webinars. And we're hoping that you're finding them useful. It is a really good opportunity for us just to be very open about what we're doing. So I'm going to kick off with just a little bit of what's been happening this week. I don't know if any of you have seen, but there's been a little campaign going on called We Stand Together with the Sector, and that represents the 300 funders that have all signed a sort of statement of reassurance, really, to say that as funders, we want to be very responsible, proactive, and to listen to what the needs are. And I guess that's what we're trying to do, and part of these webinars are helping us to do that. But more importantly, we actually want to tell the story of Oxfordshire. We want to put Oxfordshire on the map, because we know that so much great work is going on from the applications that we see, and we think that's a really important story to share. You'll see there is a map there on the slide, and that's really there as a nod to, it's also a very special week. On Saturday, the Community Foundation is going to be 25 years old, and we were going to be having a big party, and obviously we're unable to do that, but we would like to celebrate at least virtually. And there was one very special person that I wanted to thank, and he has been on the call, the webinars of the last 3 weeks. I haven't yet seen him sign in today, but it's our president, the Lord Lieutenant Tim Stevenson. And I would like to say that I think on behalf of the sector in Oxfordshire, Tim Stevenson does such a lot to stand with the sector. He's always there as a voice, recognising what all of the charities and those that work in the charities do for the wider community. So I thought I'd just take that opportunity to thank Tim as our president, but also to thank all of you again for everything that you are doing. Very, very briefly again, I think all of you know that the fund has 2 main aims. We are looking at applications that are responding to the immediate crises that we're seeing, and maybe changing their services to meet those needs. But more importantly, we have a sort of eye very much on what the sector is going to need as we move forward, that we're calling Recover Stronger. And that's definitely something that we're very keen to understand how we can help further on that in particular. But more importantly, I think what's become a sort of weekly table is that we share the amount of money that we have been able to award. And I'm delighted that following a little bit of feedback and much hard work by the team, couldn't do this without the team putting in all the hours and all the effort. But we will be having a weekly download that will be available on our website for people to see the amount of grants that we've made, who we've made those to, and what the projects were for. But hopefully you'll see from this slide what we're actually doing in terms of where the priorities are. You'll see in the sector what we mean by that is where the focus of the charitable effort is, and the split between what we're currently seeing as food distribution and other things around advice and support. and also the amount that we're able to be distributing on behalf of the National Emergencies Trust to date has been 127,346. So we're very grateful to all of the people that are also supporting the national appeal that helps us. However, perhaps more importantly today, I wanted just to mention that we've slightly looking at when we award grants and when they're actually paid, we thought going forward it might be much fairer to actually publish the amount of actually paid. So going forward, the amount would actually be today £179,021, but the amounts of the grants that we have approved are 194,925. So if some of you can remember from last week, I suggested the figure was 182,000 last week. That's why the number is slightly down. So sometimes we don't have all the correct bank details. There may just be reasons that there's actually a delay. And I think the team have been working really hard. It appears that we're actually turning applications around on average at the moment. It's taking about 5 days and probably 7 days for those organisations to get funds. So I think that's a fantastic achievement in terms of trying to put money out where it's really needed. So I hope that you'll find that encouraging news. Looking at the distribution of grants, it's really important that as we look at the crisis, we're very conscious that we have an eye on the whole county. And I hope that you'll see from this little pie chart that we have been able to do that quite representative of where the population is. Obviously, there are a lot more people in Oxford, so that's often why there's a bulk of grants being made to Oxford. I think going forward, what we are really trying to do, though, is to learn from this whole process. As I'm sure all of you are, we're having to adapt the way we do things. We're learning that we can do things that perhaps might have taken a really long time before. We're able to do them quicker. But I think we are still looking at the application and trying to see how we can maybe make improvements to that. I know that last week we talked about the benefit of having really good sort of stories about where money has gone out and the real difference it's made right immediately. So we are looking for groups to actually help us with that. And I think one of the things is being able to say very easily what it is that you're actually doing. So those are little tweaks that we might be making to the application form that will enable us to do that better. And as I say, we're always reviewing how long it takes. I believe that we've had over 101 applications to date. And so we have been able to get the money out towards those. So after the webinar today, I know that on our homepage, you'll be able to find the link to our resilience overview. And as I say, you can download all of this information and all of the grants that have already received funds. So I hope that that will be of interest, because I know that's something that people have been asking for. So I think with that, we are moving on. Just to say very much thank you again, as we did last week, to the National Emergencies Trust. The funds that Oxfordshire has received to date has been 188,990. I believe hopefully many of you will be spending the night in tomorrow watching the air date, which is a sort of, I guess it's a concert, what would have been Children in Need, but it's actually all for the COVID response, and some of those funds will be going back through the National Emergencies Trust and making their way to Oxfordshire. So that's absolutely great news. Thank you. And back to Adrian.
Thank you, Jayne. And just a reminder for those of you joining a little late, if you could put your name and organisation in the chat box, that would be great. And if you have any comments or questions, then please do add them there as we go along. I'd like to invite Graham Ingram now to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you are able. And I will hand over to you to talk about IT security in this age of online working.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Hello, everybody. Let me see if I can work the technology here. It'd be rather embarrassing if I can't. Okay, because I'm working on two screens here, Adrian, can you confirm that you can see that that first slide?
Yes, I can. Sorry, I was on mute. I was muted there, but that looks clear to me.
Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. So I've got about 8 slides here, and I'm going to talk for 10 minutes, and hopefully set up for some questions at the end. Now, one word of caution. My profession always tries to sell its wares based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And inevitably, the messaging around information security can sound a little alarming. But in reality, there is probably a real world analogy in that. Let's take a live example right now. When we talk about Zoom bombing, where people are invading conferences such as this and often displaying unpleasant images or something which is counter to the message and the purpose of the meeting, it is a virtual equivalent of people invading a village hall where once a meeting would have been held. The difficulty, of course, is people's perception of it, because they fear that they have less control of these things. There isn't a policeman who's going to come and sort the situation out, and because it's on your laptop in front of you, it is invading your personal space. So there's a perception issue here, but in reality, what I'm trying to say is that the language we talk in terms of information security does sound scary, but it ought not to be. And at the end, and maybe as part of the discussion, we might want to pivot on to how we can make a more positive message out of applying good information security into what we do. Let me skip on to the next slide, if this will let me. So 5 key areas we're going to talk about as to whether charities really are a target for cyber criminals. What are those risks? What are the controls? Control being some element of activity or setting or something that you can do about it. How do we do that? And where else on the last slide can you go for further help? So inevitably, in 8 minutes left now, we're just going to scratch the surface. But there's 4 key resources which I'm going to come on to at the end, and which means you really don't need to take any notes during this. You can go back to those points of resource and get fully informed in an hour or 2 of reading. So are charities a target? Well, the fact that you handle various types of data which are very similar to most other corporate organizations means that you are inevitably a target. And the perception from people out there, those malactors who may want to use the internet for nefarious things, or that you are a source of collection of money from supporters. Maybe you have a retail outlet, or maybe from various other mechanisms of donations, you are an area where money is going to flow into. There are no morals amongst cyber criminals. The picture on the right maybe counters that. That's the Guy Fawkes mask, normally associated with an organization called Anonymous, and is often used in the cyber world to represent a group that we would refer to as hacktivists. And a hacktivist is someone who'll use the cybersphere for their own morals or displaying their own ethics. And maybe not the greatest threat to charities, but there has been instances where a particular charity has been targeted by hacktivists because what they're doing is something that they do not agree with. But inevitably, the real focus is money. And where larger corporate organizations with a bottom line and maybe a stock price, concerned about their shareholders and their reputation, are able to and are applying much greater cybersecurity protective techniques. It doesn't mean they're still not lucrative targets. It doesn't mean they're still not targeted by cyber attackers. It just means that the average Joe cyber attacker is going to be less successful, and as a result, they kind of move down the stack into what is considered the softer underbelly. So if you like, as banks get better at cybersecurity, as companies spend more on cybersecurity, they're displacing the criminal activity into other areas where in the past, charities may have thought that they were, as a result of their ethical purview, not necessarily the most appropriate target. But if you are interested in making money any way you can, then you become by default the softer underbelly. On the next slide, we'll talk about the target and the threat, but I'll just draw your attention to the image on the right-hand side. First off, a slightly old report is available on the National Cyber Security Centre website, and there's some guidance there for small charities in particular, but actually there's some various sources of guidance, which I'm going to refer to in the last slide again, which are good for all to take care of. The first bullet point, I think we've covered. The second bullet point, the scale of reporting. Well, actually, this is not an issue for charities, but the report does make a point that the NCSC are a little bit lacking in the data as to how much of a problem cybersecurity breaches are in charities. There has been one report recently, October last year, which indicated up to 1/3 of charities have suffered some sort of information security or cyber incident. But there is an issue not only in this sector, but in all sectors where people don't report. And that causes a problem for the National Cybersecurity Centre, because without capturing the trends and without being able to identify to government where there is a long-term threat or a growing threat, it's less able to justify where things need to be done. It is and should be reassuring to you that the NCSC has and is paying some attention to the charity sector and has produced this guidance. But if you do and are subject to any sort of cybersecurity incident, I would recommend that you report it, and you can do so securely through the NCSC website. If you don't report it, and people don't because they fear that it will damage their reputation and hence their revenue, because people will stop donating to an organization that appears not to be able to look after their information, well, then there's a second danger in that information will still come out in the wash at some point later on, and then there's seen as an element of trying to hide the truth. But it is a real issue for all organizations, and I think the most for charity sector. On that third bullet point, you're all about delivering your charity effect and reducing the costs of doing so in any way possible. And therefore, expenditure on IT and expenditure on information security may not seem as high a priority. And that's one area really that I cannot answer for you. It is just something for you to consider in terms of balancing your normal outgoings and costs as to whether protecting your information security will avoid reputational damage, loss of revenue, and potentially fines from the Information Commissioner's Office if private data is leaked. And the reason why that might happen, on the fourth bullet point, is that although a charity may not be a particularly wealthy organization to target in the first place, there is circa 200,000 charities in the UK, and that's looking at what is registered charities in England and Wales, plus Scotland, plus Northern Ireland. And with them being seen as the softer underbelly, there is a potential for voluminous attacks as opposed to particularly targeted attacks to steal money from a lucrative organization. And how that is done is covered in that last bullet point. Charities are, by definition, normally open organizations and are publishing details of key stakeholders involved in that charity on various websites. There's a potential for people to cross-reference that information into other social media sites such as Facebook, and again, an idea of somebody's pattern of life and who they are, and then use that, working out who their friends are, who their co-workers are, to conduct a social engineering attack. And if you got an email from one of your co-workers, even if it was worded in a way that you wouldn't normally expect, and it might even be badly translated from a foreign language, you're intuitively inclined to trust it because it's come from a named co-worker. So that's something which has been derived from social engineering. It's targeted particularly at you, so it's a spear phishing email. And what that can be used as is a vector by which they gain access to some credentials. Maybe they've asked you to enter some details or some passwords, and that will allow them to have access to your computer and to your system, and then allow them to download some malware. And one particularly pernicious type of malware is something which encrypts all of your files and demands a ransom for you to unlock those files. And one of the things that we'll talk about in a minute is about the need for backups. One word of caution: some organizations do choose to pay the ransom, but there is no guarantee that someone who has encrypted all of your files and locked them with a cryptographic key will actually unlock them for you if you pay the ransom. In terms of identity theft, if you contain enough PII, privileged information sources, such that someone can steal an identity, that's more lucrative than a bank record. On the dark web, a bank record normally retails for about $2, but a medical record retails for about $20, because you can use that really to set up mortgages and bank accounts and take over somebody's identity completely. We've talked about delivery of payloads and malware and ransoms. The other opportunity here that's presented by access to your systems is to steal data, take that away, and either sell it on the dark web for somebody else to do that thing that I've just suggested in terms of making revenue from your personal information. But also in doing so, that breach then inevitably is a reportable offence to the Information Commissioner's Office and can result in fines. And charities have been fined by the Information Commissioner's Office. And if all of that isn't enough, there's an opportunity for them to pretend to be you and then get access to your donors and get them to redirect money. And instead of going into your bank account, it goes into a bank account belonging to that malicious actor.
You've got a couple of minutes left, Graham.
Okay. On the next slide, just a couple of examples where a charity has lost £13,000. It was a sort of natural history-based charity, and effectively somebody intercepted the comms between their CEO and a provider, and stole that information. I'm just going to skip on from the rest of this slide, just as there are further examples. Really, I wanted to talk about some of the areas that you can do to finish this this particular part of the presentation off. Most importantly, if you've got a single central email account that you use to reset all of your other accounts, so for example, online trading, Amazon, Netflix, all the other things that are essential while we're in COVID-19 lockdown, make sure that of all of your accounts has got a unique and strong password. And there's some recommendations on there. If you can enable two-factor authentication, that's where potentially they send you an SMS message or another email, or use an app like Microsoft Authenticator. NCSC even recommend using the password manager that's built into things like the Google browser or even Microsoft Edge to store those passwords. Make sure you've got automatic updates switched on, and the same with any sort of backup service that you can avail yourself of. On third-party services, look at settings. So Zoom being a third-party service, I would always recommend not using freeware versions of any third-party service, but if you do make close use of any settings that you can make to make it more secure. If you are paying a subscription, it certainly allows you to put passwords onto meetings. It allows you to set up a waiting room so that people who invite themselves into your meeting are held in a waiting room and you can't let them onto the main body of the meeting. And certainly if you're the owner or the manager of such a meeting, that you allocate or take control of who can get access to displaying their stuff on the screen, so that we don't see a repeat of some instance recently where some very obscene material was shared on screens during some of our alumni gatherings. And do some training, and you can find a free training resource on the NCSC's website. The bits on the right, I've blocked out the charity, not because it's not open source anyway, but it's just out of politeness, but there are plenty of examples of where a charity has been fined £100,000, and that fine stemmed from one badly secured email account, one bad password led to £100,000 loss for a charity. There's 4 screenshots here in this last slide. On the National Cybersecurity Centre, you'll find a small charity guide, which is well worth the read. Information Commissioner's Office will give you a good definition of what GDPR is, and also some frequently asked questions on how it pertains to charities, and what is the likelihood of a charity getting a fine if it has an information security breach, and most importantly, what your needs are in terms of reporting a breach, and also in managing personal information, and the right for deletion and the right for correction and all those good things. On the .gov website, you'll find some more detail about how to protect your charity from fraud and cybercrime, and there's 2 particular parts in there. Sorry, the gold arrows have just popped up. On the middle one, there's 2 parts about cybercrime and reporting attacks. How to report that, if you look in the left-hand picture on the NCSC website, there's a report an incident button on the NCSC Incident Office. They may not do a great deal with it, but they will be very interested in any reports that you make of them, of any cyber incidents, and that is confidential. That will not lead to a loss and damage to your reputation. And then the other arrow, I'm just pointing out the address bar on a website, and look out for that padlock or the HTTPS. The S bit's the important. That makes it a secure website. Always make sure the website that you think you're visiting is the one you ought to be visiting. Last screenshot on the right-hand side. If you're a charity with a retail outlet or taking donations by credit card, you are likely to be susceptible to the payment card industry digital security standard, PCI DSS. And I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with some of the things that you ought to be doing in that area. If you have a mistake in that area, the cost of transactions with your online banking provider can increase or could be denied to you altogether if you're not seen as secure enough when you're doing credit card transactions over the net. Those are the key areas that I wanted to cover, and I'll pass back to you, Adrian, for brokering any questions.
Thank you, Graham. That's a really useful run through. I've got two quick questions, but I think then we'll need to pass over to Rupert da Silva. One, I think you're going to share some useful links with us so that we can publicise them for the wider group, and so I think that would be really useful for people.
I will do.
And secondly, if you could just talk us through a few of the alternatives to Zoom that might offer more security, although I know Zoom has been tightened up recently in some of the ways that you talked about, but some of the other alternatives people might want to think about.
Well, I will do. Look, all online services are vulnerable some way or the other. Zoom became vulnerable because it had a massive growth in its users, massive uptake in its service, and actually it sprinted very, very quickly to catch up with the security demands. And is Zoom secure? Look, it's secure enough for Parliament to be using it during its sittings. It was secure enough for Cobra to be using it, and even on occasions displaying screenshots with details of their Zoom meetings, which they ought not to. So I would agree with points made earlier that Zoom is secure for the sort of information that you're normally using. But if you have particular information which you might categorize as confidential, particularly around users, particularly if that user information or your stakeholder groupings or your customers, and you're identifying anything which is privileged information, particularly around disabilities, political leanings, orientation, anything like that, and these are all listed on the ICO's website, then I would avoid using certainly any free service, but certainly not Zoom on even a paid license, only because the data is all kept in the US. And although we have made an assessment of the security of how they keep the data at rest in their data centers, we have to take their word for it. And there has been instances where their own user details have been compromised. Alternative services, there's plenty out there. We use Microsoft Teams in the university as a preferred service because we pay for a subscription around that, and we have extra controls. We have got some resources that look after that area and they monitor it. So we're providing monitoring on the back of Microsoft Teams. It's not that it is inherently any more secure. We pay for a license for Microsoft Teams, and that makes it us able to get more support from Microsoft if there is a breach. There's a WebEx service that's in fact the guys who invented Zoom came from WebEx. There's about a dozen others. I don't have them all off the top of my head. I've got a comparison table, and I can certainly issue that document out to you with before the end of the week with a list of the top 12 services that people like to use. But listen, the message here is for the sort of work that you would normally be doing, especially in the bigger grouping where you're less likely to be talking about confidential information, Zoom's fine. If you're talking about something which is confidential, by very definition should be in a smaller grouping. And you know what? For end-to-end encryption, I'd probably use WhatsApp.
Great. Thank you very much, Graham. That's been really useful, really interesting talk. I'm going to crack straight on now to Rue. If you want to turn your camera on and unmute yourself, so you can tell us a little bit about Oxfordshire All In.
Hi.
Hi, Rue. Right.
Okay.
You've got 10 minutes, okay?
Sure. Adrian, can I'm going to put on the slides that we've got, and then I suppose that will mean expanding my screen. So if you can't hear me or something goes wrong, just shout and let me know. Otherwise, hopefully it'll work. I can share my screen, can't I? Oh, I can't. Not until Graham's stop sharing.
Can you unshare your screen?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cool. Hi everyone. Just to confirm, Adrian, that you can still hear me.
Yes, can still hear you.
Okay, brilliant. Hi guys. First things first, thanks for having us. It feels like a real privilege to be able to have a whole 10 minutes to explain what we're doing, particularly when there are so many unbelievable projects happening across the county, often run by community organisations with real funding issues at the moment, and they're still finding a way to make those projects happen. So I really appreciate having the time to talk about what we're doing. So Oxfordshire All In, I've put a few slides together to explain a bit of the why, the how and the what's of what we're doing. We're all about data collection, mapping, communication, coordination and strategic tools. And I've put a few slides together to explain a little bit more what that means in each of those areas. But to start with the why, I guess we probably all felt this need 4 or 5 weeks ago for a rapid and joined up response to COVID-19. I think it was particularly on our minds that response was going to have to include and support a very wide range of groups and perspectives, from local grassroots community groups up to our public services and key infrastructural voluntary organisations. Inspiration came from 2 places too, in particular. One was the Oxfordshire Additional Needs Partnership, which we are involved in as founders and participants. And you know, we were thinking a lot 5 weeks ago, well, how do we know what our beneficiaries need, and how best can we help them? And it seems that the kind of structure that we might need as a platform for that wasn't all there. So Oxfordshire All In was in part an approach to put that structure in place. And Oxford Hub as well, I think, were really inspirational in terms of what they were doing on a city level. And certainly we wanted to see that kind of high quality work happening across the county, and for places to be as connected and joined up. So how we try to provide simple, flexible tools that enable people to get on with what they need to do best. We've tried to do that ever since with what our teams developed. And as I say, we'll come on some example of those next. To give a bit of an overview though, we're now joining the dots between over 560 groups across the county, and there's a breakdown there of what those groups are at the moment. Those groups, particularly the local community grassroots support groups that have flourished across the county at this time, they reach 60,000 plus volunteers now that are working on the COVID response specifically, which is quite something. And that's been amazing to be able to. That's been an amazing community to be able to support with information and a community engagement team and all of the other tools that we provide. On our side, we've also mobilised a team of over 50 absolutely incredible people, including a wide range of volunteers, but also staff seconded from Active Oxfordshire, Health Watch and the Cowley Road Carnival. So a particular thank you to them for showing a lot of generosity and also vision and open-mindedness in making that capacity available to us, which has been crucial. So that's a little bit of the top line, what numbers. What are we actually doing? Well, we provide support to individuals and community groups. I've screenshotted a couple of pages from our website there to show the kind of local, the tools we provide to individuals in particular. So if you're looking for local support, you can go onto the website and find your local group, and also find established community organisations and public services that are working in those areas. There's lots of guidance and resources on the website. There's a big community engagement team that does all sorts of things, including a daily bulletin, a community support group forum, and supports on the phone and via email, and also through a new programme of Zoom calls, which we've put together over the last couple of weeks. In terms of support for public bodies, community organisations and businesses, this is much more on the back end side. So we're doing a lot of data collection from community support groups, community organisations, businesses, and others. We then analyse and map that data in ways that we hope is useful. And then we share that so that other organizations can use that data and use those visualizations to aid their own decision making. On top of that work on data collection, analysis and mapping, we have ended up being one hub for coordinated large-scale targeted communications, and we've also done work in a number of areas on the bringing together of partners across sectors in particular, where they're coordinating on the work that we're doing. So that's a little bit of an overview. I've got a case study for each area to make it even more concrete what that looks like. So data collection and analysis, we worked alongside the organisations listed to co-produce a voluntary sector survey. That was to understand more about what the voluntary sector looks like at the moment, what beneficiary groups they're working with, what support they might need and what capacity they have to give. That's been really useful so far. We've had lots of responses. They continue to come in. This screenshot of a dashboard that we put together a couple of weeks ago shows how that data is then used. So it all comes into some kind of map or data visualization otherwise that allows us to see useful stuff. So for example, this screenshot happens to show a heat map of the capacity of community support groups across the county, and that was from a couple of weeks ago. On the mapping side, we've got a very obvious public-facing mapping tool on the public website, but then we also have private or back-end mapping tools which are being used by the districts and county council and some public services to help with brokering support requests at their end. It's been great to be able to provide those tools. On communication and community engagement, I've mentioned already the forums or the forum that we host and provide as a hub for community support group leaders to come to, share, coordinate, talk with each other, and hopefully go back to their own groups feeling stronger and more resilient and more supported. We have a daily bulletin that goes out to the same groups every day. Two, I mentioned the program of Zoom calls or workshops already. We're really excited that one of those is going to be from Age UK Oxfordshire soon on the topic of bereavement, and we welcome any other organisations too to get in touch with us if they think they, if they'd like to get involved in that programme of Zoom workshops. And then I've mentioned the community engagement team already, but I wanted to give them a particular shout out because Stephanie, Alana, Reem, Sunny, Kate and Bethan have been doing amazing work behind the scenes to make sure that on a day-by-day basis, pretty much 7 days a week, those local community support groups and other people who want to engage or work with Oxfordshire All In have someone who they can talk to directly. Final case study, coordination and strategy. I've just put a few organisations that we've done some really fantastic work with. I just want to pull out a few examples. So really recently, Team Oxford, we've had some fantastic conversations over the last few days. Further to their launch, I'd encourage anyone to go and have a look at their website. There's some fantastic potential and work already happening there, and we're looking forward to supporting that. The organisations I've mentioned on the survey side already, but then we've been grateful to be able to have the opportunity to support and promote the work of people like Sophia, Oxfordshire Mind, and also to work alongside the adults and children's safeguarding boards to make sure that the right kind of safeguarding information's getting out there to the right people too. I've mentioned Oxfordshire County Council. We've been working very closely with them for the last few weeks, and that's been a real pleasure. A couple of final slides. So one is why Keen. So Oxfordshire All In is a project of Keen, and in some ways that's slightly unusual. It's certainly a different type of work to what we're doing normally, but in other ways it actually coheres really well with what we do. And so I've just wanted to highlight a few of those. I guess we like to think of ourselves as nimble and effective. I suppose that's for other people to judge ultimately, but we definitely do try to be a big small charity in the sense that we mobilise a big volunteer team. We have a very small staff team, but we like to try to achieve a lot for that. So yeah, so we've applied some useful existing capacity in the following areas: collaboration and partnership. I mentioned already, we took a lead role in establishing the Additional Needs Partnership, and we've tried to employ some of that experience and understanding to this project. Rapid infrastructure development. The Oxfordshire All In website, from conception through to design to launch, took about 10 hours, which we were really proud of at the time. Of course, there's been all sorts of work since. Strategic planning, and something else I guess must have been in there originally in my head, but I suppose I've alluded to that already. And mobilising large numbers of volunteers, and our team's been absolutely fantastic. So moving on from that point in particular, I just wanted to say thank you to that wonderful volunteer team who are really doing fantastic work for us. I also want to say thank you to all of the colleagues and partners across the voluntary, public and private sectors who have supported us too and helped us to be able to work as flexibly and as simply as possible. To OCF for the grant that they gave us a few weeks ago, that is supporting the direct costs of this core work, or this core project at the moment. And without that, we certainly wouldn't be able to be doing it. And not least, of course, to all of those people across Oxfordshire. Some I know are on the call today from our community support groups, who are just doing such unbelievable work to support communities and each other at this time. Thank you to you also for listening. I've gone over by a minute or two, I think.
That's all right. We're forgiving you.
And I shall just leave this slide up for a moment to let you know what some of our next steps are. One of those, apart from looking at how we support Recover Stronger, is to invite further engagement and proposals from organisations interested in Oxfordshire All In and what future it might have. And we're really happy to hear from anyone who's got anything they'd like to discuss on any of those 3 points. Thanks, Adrian, and everyone else.
Thank you, Ru. Well, while people collect their thoughts and start either posting questions in the chat box or unmuting themselves and turning their cameras on, can I just ask you, roughly how many staff and how many volunteers do you have working on Oxfordshire All In at the moment?
So on the Keen side, we have 1.5 full-time staff members. We've also got Josh Lenthal from Active Oxfordshire is doing a fantastic job heading up our community engagement side of things, and he's with us for 20 hours a week, although he does substantially more as a volunteer, which we're indebted to him for. We've also had staff from Callaway Carnival and Health Watch for 2 or 3 mornings a week, which has been great too. Then our volunteer team is over 25-30 people at any given point across those areas that we mentioned in the slides earlier.
Fantastic. I mean, I think it just illustrates it's a very small team, and you've brought a huge amount of capacity to this in a very short space of time. And that's being echoed by people in the comments. So thank you to you and your team for everything you've been doing. It's been really critical in terms of helping coordinate and inform the response. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Ru or for Graham that they, or generally in terms of the Resilience Fund for Jayne, that they would like to raise? Either unmute yourself and start speaking, or raise your hand, or the floor is yours.
I have a question for Ru.
Antonia.
It's Ros, actually.
Oh, Ros, sorry.
From Charity Mentors. Hi.
Hi, Ros.
Hi. I wondered, Ru, I mean, you've been talking to a lot of people in a lot of groups in Oxfordshire, and I just wondered if there are sort of common themes coming through in terms of the sort of support that people are looking for, or is it very, sort of very individual?
We lost you there, Ros.
I start to answer the question. Once you're back, Ros, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you're talking about the kind of support that's being asked for from, say, local community support groups, it's so varied. It's so varied, and that's a challenge which we've tried to embrace as wholeheartedly as possible. Groups are in such different positions. They're doing such different work. So everything from really groups who have been established for far longer than ourselves and are looking for specific advice on data protection or safeguarding, to groups who are just getting started doing something very specific in a local community. The request for information on bereavement was a good example of that the other day. So yeah, we're really trying to provide support to so many different types of requests at the moment, and also from established community organisations too.
Right, thank you. Yeah, that you anticipated however, wherever you lost me, you got the question right.
We've got a question for Graham in the chat box. Do you think there's increased safeguarding risk now that support services are having to go online? And if so, what are the biggest threats? And any suggestions about how we might mitigate those? Graham, you are unmuted now, I think.
I am. Yeah, that's a really good question, and what I'm going to have to think about and maybe come back to you afterwards. Initial gut reaction is there must be an increased safeguarding risk. I'm a governor at a local primary school, and certainly we have been doing a lot of reviews on our safeguarding policies and how we change those for this more distance learning and distributed environment. How those are mitigated, certainly in the school, we're talking about the ability to do visits and whether they're the sort of activity which allows us to, if you like, go against the social distancing policies, because there's a balance between one risk and another. But it's really not clear at this stage, so I'll have to come back to you on that one.
Thanks, Graham. I mean, I think it does present a lot of issues and a lot of threats. I mean, you've alluded to the reduced contact that people have. I think there's also risks in terms of online grooming, which we know was an issue prior to COVID, but now so much interaction is having to go online. I think that becomes an increasing risk. Antonia, you've unmuted. Is that because you want to ask a question?
No, it's because I just wanted to comment on this briefly. Is that it's something that all community groups have been handling differently. So I know that because a lot of community groups now are doing phone chat and things like that, and there's some groups have done a model where they've just paired up somebody who's requested what one group calls it the buddy system with an individual person in the community, and other groups are sort of doing chat calls to their people in their team, and it's something that different groups have taken very different approaches on whether they sort of looking at DBS checks or whether just pairing somebody up in a neighbourhood. And some of it depends on how large the group is, and some of it is sort of on response time. So I know that one group, I think in Yarnton, is having DBS check people only doing it, but it's also a question of the level, because one of the things that's very, very difficult for groups like ours is because we're getting direct requests from individuals in the public. They don't necessarily tell, they might not know if they're early stage Alzheimer's or something like that. They're not necessarily identifying themselves as particularly vulnerable. I know that I've been one of the people who was barraging Rue's group saying, I can get basic DBS checks all you want, but the framework for non-official groups like ours to have enhanced DBS checks just isn't in place, and we're getting some limited support for that, but it is a massive safeguarding issue.
Thank you, Antonia. So any other questions or comments, or Jayne or Kate, do you want to talk about what's coming up next week?
Hi, Kate at OCF. Next week we have people, and I think Susie's on here, could be able to tell us a bit more about them, who are talking about, because they work with families and how they're working online now. And also we have Didcot Train, who are going to talk about their experience as a case study next week, the funding they received from us. Thanks,
Kate. And just to say, I mean, if there are issues or organisations people want to see featured, then please do drop us a line. We'd like to make these as useful and interactive as possible. But if there aren't any further questions, I'm going to hand back to Jayne for a few final words.
Thank you, Adrian. I think that in the chat, I can see that Graham has been providing all the links for everyone. So good to know that there is a big difference between the premium Zoom and the free version. So that is perhaps a cost that maybe charities should be including in their budget going forward. So that's helpful, Graham. Thank you. I think just to say that, yes, we're constantly trying to learn from the format of these afternoon sessions. And I think probably in about 2 weeks' time as well, we'd like to have one where we do bring back quite a lot of the charities that have received grants, just to say a few words about the impact that they're having. Because I think that's the key thing here, is actually we're all working together to try and help the communities, you know, do things together. So I think that that's the key thing that we want to keep focusing on. So thank you for your time, and we'll keep doing our best to raise even more money for the fund. So thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And just to say that we will share the video online, and the chat, the comments in the chat box from Graham in terms of the links we will make available as well. So you don't need to be desperately writing those down, although you could just copy and paste them out of the chat box. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We'll stay online if anyone has any pressing questions or comments. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you next week, and do be in touch in the meantime. I will now stop the recording.
Hey, Adrian.